Welcome, this is Josh Dippold of integratingpresence.com. Randy Green's back with me again, and we watched this movie called A Dangerous Method from 2011 about Jung and Freud, kind of based on a true story supposedly, but we don't think it was actually quite realistic in many regards. Keira Knightley plays their mutual female patient, I would say.
Yeah, to begin with, and later on they're kind of, and then student, and then later on one of the first female psychoanalysts, that's difficult to say, that were educated, a Russian physician actually. Sabina Spielrein, sorry about that, Sabina Spielrein, Russian. But the surname, of course, indicates she's Jewish, and Freud was Jewish, and Carl Gustav Jung was Aryan, as they say it in the Protestant. So, and there's the whole interplay with her in the middle, that weird triangle between patient and two upcoming psychoanalysts that are discussing how are they going to do this. But that's not the whole point. The reason why we bring this into the conversation is there's one topic I always wanted to touch ground with, and that's kind of some of the Carl Gustav Jung ideas, because I work with Jung and psychoanalysis. Difficult to say. I read most of his books, his biography, not that I completed his books because they're a heavy read, and not that I am a Jungian or whatsoever. But he has some pretty strong ideas about the feminine and the masculine in the feminine, which he calls, when we talk about the feminine in the masculine, it's called the anima, it's an archetype. And when it is the masculine and the feminine, then it's called the animus. And these are Latin words that actually, anima actually means spirit, which is interesting. So he alludes to this into the collective subconscious, where we have these gestalts, or these entities, these archetypes that can inflate us, that can give us ideas and concepts of who and what we are. And the first level of understanding that is part of the anima, or the animus, that we need to encounter and integrate to make ourselves whole, along with the shadow. And that's also, and the shadow in itself, as he writes in one of his biographies, is all about the, I say one of his because there are many different versions of them through different shadow writers and what have you. And I haven't read all of them. The one I read were 20 years ago or something. It's not something I recall specifically, but he talks about the shadow as being from Irenaeus, which is one of the church fathers. And when we talk about the masculine in the feminine, and the feminine in the masculine, or the masculine in the woman and the feminine in the man, we have already that in one of the Apocrypha of the Gospels, the Maria Magdalena Gospel, where it's said that the way that females will reach Christianity, the top level of Christianity, to become part of the corpus of Christ, which they didn't work with at the time, but that's the idea, was if she would become like a man. So it goes far, far back. And so I want to say it's not just Jung that came up with it. It's part of our culture, it's part of this. We also see it in Freemason. And we also see it in old Egyptian mythology with the trinities. We see it with the father, mother, child trinity that we need to work with the child, with the son, with the daughter. We have the mother and the father, which is, as I interpret it, is why in some of the Gospels it's said that we need to honor our mother and father, both physically, but also because they have given us life. But also because, as I work with, they're part of a fetal pattern. The energy from mom and dad were integrated into our energy system in our biofield. It's part of our biofield, it's part of our energetic structure.
Well, there's lots of places to take this. I don't know exactly where to take it for now. Just a few thoughts, though. You know, in spiritual circles and a lot of New Age distortion circles, let's call it that. You know, we talked earlier about trying with the masculine, trying to connect with our inner feminine, and for the feminine connecting with their inner masculine, and drawing these things out, and kind of seeing the pros and cons to this too as well. There's something called a gender principle. And I know gender in general is a huge topic now in academia and activist circles and things like this. I see so many distortions around gender now. It is a really huge topic. So without going off the rails too much here, I'm trying to find a focus. But the shadow side, I'm wondering about if this is also my understanding of the shadow, or one of the ways I like to look at it that's found helpful for me is that the ego is like the shadow, right? That hasn't been addressed or integrated to parts of the ego, yeah. Shadow work that people talk about is a whole nother huge topic that we both have different takes and notions on this. So where do we want to dive in here?
Well, to give a little bit, just to kind of put some of these things in boxes. So when we talk about gender, in the old days, it was tied to biology, and of course social constructions, social ideas of this is how society is supposed to be. It was religiously, politically, culturally determining what a gender was, aside from penises and vaginas, right? The roles within the ones that had a penis were supposed to operate that way, the ones that have a vagina were supposed to operate that way. And of course, we are now entering to a completely new level of humanity where we can transform our bodies, we can change our psychosexual structure, we can feel more like males, we can feel more like females, all depending on if we're born with a penis or with a vagina. And we can change that so we now can have a vagina without a womb, and we can have a womb with a penis. Sorry.
Well, that's right.
Sorry. Sorry, I'm not laughing. I'm taking this very seriously. But it is very confusing for people like me of the older generation.
Same,
But I am completely on board with it. I am not a psychoanalyst, but I'm a psychotherapist, and these different concepts of gender and how I feel. I remember when I was a teenager, I felt very masculine. I felt as in kind of, am I even attracted to males? And I kind of, in a way, not to do Freud's, I had penis envy, not at all, but I was kind of, as many females probably have felt, why am I deprived of social status? Why am I deprived of all of these capacities that males have just because I don't have a penis? Then I want a penis. Not that I was envy. I was just kind of because I'm a feminist, I was kind of, I want the same rights. I want the same social structure. Just because I have a vagina, I put my foot down, why don't I have the same possibilities?
And I think a lot of this has been realized now. And instead of giving, addressing it that way, it's been turned into a gender issue now instead of a power dynamic, And so now it's just gone off the other end where I think it's been all about gender now. When the core of it actually means that, just because you have a vagina doesn't mean that you shouldn't have more social status. But now it's been flipped into all gender. Now, I've got mixed feelings about this. Now, when an individual sits in front of me and I talk to them, that's how I like to address people. To make these broad, sweeping scales about other things, it's not as important for me. I mean, I can weigh into it.
Yeah, but it's difficult because what we're dealing with here, now let's do down that path first, because it's tied into it. First and foremost, it's about the whole, it's a spectrum. So we can't say it's that box or that box or that box. It's a whole spectrum. There's work within the spectrum of different interpretation and understandings. The whole, when we talk about going into biology in the early stages of the fetal, the fetal pattern, so to speak, but the embryo, that's the DNA has not yet evolved into either male or female. That actually comes later. So the chromosomes are technically identical in the early stages of the embryo. So that's why men have nipples, and technically and scientifically the vagina is similar, out of the same tissue that is building into the penis. So we have the building blocks are the same in males and females. So that's biology, and then it diverts due to the chromosomal features, right? So that's part of biology, and I'm not going to go into why that has happened and what's the cause of that and how that was re-engineered to be so. But when we talk about current reality and things how they are now, so to speak, we can say where I want to go with this. When I was in Israel, when I was 18, and my boyfriend was Israeli, and he came originally from Yemen, with his family coming from Yemen as well. And within Jewish belief system, it is the female, that it's the mother that brings forth the genetic lineage, not the father. So when you are an Aryan from the northern hemisphere, white skin, coming to Israel and become a girlfriend of your very black-skinned son that is of Yemen lineage, of African lineage within the Jewish system, then I was not particularly welcome. So I felt this hostility towards me, both as not being Jewish religiously, also coming from a different parts of the world politically and culturally, but also having the wrong skin color, which was a huge learning lesson for me, because I have felt this subconscious and subliminal of not being accepted as a female in the world, which is run by males to a large degree. Whereas males, because males have that prerogative of being the leading elite, so whether they know of it or not, there are many things that males are not taking into consideration. Similarly as people of color, when they are in the northern hemisphere and are part of a society, whether they're born here or not, they have other ways that they must tiptoe around. Or if you come from the Middle East area and you come to a northern country, you have things you need to tiptoe around because there have been different classification. That type of race goes with that type of trouble or problem and what have you, to put it without going into political discussion. So the way we interpret it depends on our experiences of how well are we integrated into society. So if you're very integrated into the social institutions, you will not think about it. You'll just say, this is just how it is. Of course, what's the problem? Duh. Whereas if you are on the fringe, because you are not part of the group, you're not part of the ones that's in the mix, then you know what it means to be different. Then you know this makes me feel different. This makes me feel uneasy. This makes me question who I am as a human being. Do I have the same right to be as the others have, which I asked myself because I was a female and I experienced how females were treated differently than males, and because I didn't have that female gene that went with the breeder program. I'm kind of more what you call a tomgirl, that kind of more boyish track. So I already had the masculine element in me, but it was tied to, as Jung would have said, probably more tied to, which he also talks about, that the animus or the anima can actually be tied to the shadow. That means the parts of us that we have suppressed because they were not accepted. And because they were suppressed into the subconscious, then hiding there in the dark, they become the shadow or gestalt that wants to be seen. It makes a lot of trouble because it wants to be heard, it wants to be seen, it wants to be acknowledged. So in a way, it's tied to if we do work with the idea of anima and animus and say we do have the inner male and the inner female as part of our female fetal pattern, as part of our biology, then what are the traits of that? So for me, it's not just about the psychosexual orientation, because that's the least of it. That's kind of the biology that drives us in a specific way that makes us be attracted to people in a different manner. Whereas the rest is what we call psychosocial or social sexual orientation, where we identify ourselves with our sexuality. And Freud and Jung are very highly into the whole sexuality. And if we go back to that movie, I just want to throw it in here. The way I saw that movie, as a critical psychotherapist, I would say they were off completely of Sabine Spielrein to a large degree, the interpretation of that, the way they portrayed her in the movie. I think the ones that made the movie were more interested in actually make it slightly pornographic. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Including when we talk about incestuous tendencies and early masochistic tendencies in a 4-year-old, giving that 4-year-old a sexual pattern that was 4-year-olds do not have vaginal fluids. They do not have sexual desires as we know of it from grown-ups. So for me, I was actually a little bit... It touched some very deep grounds when we talk about sexual abuse, which the one that made the movie had no insight into whatsoever. So for me, it's not a movie I would recommend unless people wants to get a completely distorted version of some of the tendencies and some of the issues that were being worked with.
That was one that threw a big red flag for both of us, because to me it seems like it could possibly be normalizing that type of thing, right? And then there's darker agendas around things. I won't talk too much about it, but there's possibly, and I'm just wondering if that was some of the intent behind, saying that, because you looked up the Wikipedia article, there was really no mention of anything like that or even hint of it like that. And we've heard about all the different things that go on in Hollywood, and not that I'm making an accusation, but I wonder is what I'm saying here. And this,
well, we could say, not that we have to go into these details, but Sabine Spielrein, she was heavily abused, violently abused by both her mom and her dad. And in my work as a psychotherapist, and some of the ones I have come across where the father could be very violent, there was often this sexual undertone, because the whole kind of pulling pants down and wiping in the bottom often, unfortunately, also could lead to other stuff.
Then it was said in the movie that they made her kiss his hand after he spanked her, right? Yes, yeah. And then this turned into kind of a fetish later on in the movie too. So it was really kind of dark and very darkly psychological too. And of course we know Freud, right? And then we got into talking about Freud and how I say he gets understated a lot. And usually it's that they give lip service to him these days, saying, yeah, he was a big pioneer, but basically he was all about sex. And I would agree with that. In my short stint in therapy, one of the things I thought was interesting is looking at people through the 3 different personality types, Freudian personality types of neurotic. I mean, it's a huge no-go in modern psychology to say somebody's neurotic. But for me, I see it in the neuroticism in most people. And if most people aren't neurotic, then there's something wrong with them. They have to have some kind of the other personality types I think were psychotic and perverse. So the ones that are looked down on today, I think, if I'm getting this right, I don't know enough about Freudian, but if you have a perverse or a psychotic personality type that's deviant compared to neurotic, which is kind of more socially acceptable, most people I would say would, if they had to be classified in that. So I saw that. Seeing people through that filter was helpful for me at some point, but I can't just stick them in those 3 boxes either. It's just this other little lens that was helpful.
And then we have the later Freudian personality types of introvert and extrovert, and all of these classifications. And I think the takeaway here is that we should be aware of classifications, including what is in the movie as a kind of Sabine. She's portrayed as a masochist, but she's not. She's a grown-up woman that suffers from trauma from childhood abuse. So she's acting that out. She needs to act it out because she's not being met, and she by that gets trauma effects. What we can say, she suffers from a very strong type of PTSD because of the beating and because of trying to avoid that. And if there was sexual abuse, and that trying to live that out because it was not addressed, because it was suppressed. So these are some of the things when we have very violent childhoods, we come up with what we could call neurotic behavior to let this steam out, so we get balanced in all the stuff that's built up. So when we talk about classification, including classifying her as a masochist, just to go with that one, I feel that's off as well. Because if she had these issues, she is not. She's just trying to cope. And I think that's important to understand in this one. Not that I am identifying myself with her, but I feel in this, when we have 2 males that are so focused on, one is, as we know, Freud had huge issues with his father, who was also what we could call a despot, and the tyrant.
Despot, yeah.
Yes, there are these ideas of behind, not that Jews are like that. Again, classification, we must be so careful, because we're talking about individual people that are interpreting their childhood in different ways, that are born into different cultural settings, different religious settings, and different possibilities, whereas Jung, he was married to a wealthy woman, so he had a lot of possibilities, and he had the right skin color, he had the right religion, and he was on the right side of the what we call the fence, so to speak, during Second World War. And whereas both Spielrein, she died in a Nazi camp in 1941, and Jung died later of cancer and what have you. So again, so we have, I think what I want to go with this, aside from the process and the discussion of some of these things, where we are seeing something in movie, we're getting the classification, and we're trying to interpret reality via classification. And that's where I want to go in when we talk about the feminine and the masculine and the feminine. Whether we're talking gender and biology, or we're talking social, psychological, and social, sexual orientation, or whatever we're doing, are these classification dynamics? Is it when we identify ourselves with a specific classification? I'm extrovert, I'm introvert, I'm this, I'm that, I'm neurotic, I'm this, or whatever. Then, or the Enneagram, or whatever we come up with, or astrology, no matter what we come up with, then we begin to put in a narrative around that word, around that concept. And then we begin to identify ourselves with it, and then perhaps actually take away our true activation potential.
Absolutely. And this just goes with labels too. I want to circle back around to a lot of the things you said here though. But by neurotic, I mostly meant today people micromanaging things, right? Everything has to be exactly the way it is. And, that's what I meant more by neurotic today, but not in the pathological sense of what it used to be meant, right? Now, you talked about the different groups and stuff, and I agree. And it makes sense to give honor and respect to the different groups. However, today, at least coming from America, I see sometimes some people almost self-censor in order to not offend people, or kind of walk on eggshells, worrying they're going to say the wrong thing and offend somebody, or get perceived as, the racist card is played so often. So many people might say you're racist just by even if it's not, just to say that for certain things, So it's this fine line of overdoing it, self-censoring, and then not being respectful. And so that's why, like, when I'm face to face with someone talking, they can tell right away, right, if there's the intent to do that or not, right?
Yeah. I would say
sure.
Collectively that we are in that process of, we have gone from a process where so much were not addressed. It
Sure.
was put under the carpet, as we say it in Danish. It was put under the rug, and we did not taboo, but we did talk about it. It was just, this is just how it is. This is who you are. This is how it is. And in that freedom process, as we see it with psychodynamics as well, if you have had something that's suppressed, the first thing that happens when it comes up to the surface is that it's almost violently yelling you in the face, and it goes completely into the opposition, where it is completely out of whack, and it just ruins everything and needs to break down all constructions and all all contours and everything that can come in with that. And in that period, people that have that psychodynamic awakening often are a little bit difficult to be around because they have not learned to balance it in, where they actually begin to say, okay, this did not work on the left side where everything was completely suppressed, but it doesn't work where everything's let in the loose. So how do I begin to navigate in this spectrum between who I am and being authentic as who I am, and stand by my emotions and my feelings and there's a difference between emotions and feelings, by my natural electrochemical responses and how I interpret that's the feelings, my belief systems, and my cognizant structure of how I want to express myself in the world. And I see that's the process that we're in when we're talking about the different smaller communities that are now coming into the surface around lesbian, gay, transgender,
yes.
and
these
new communities.
It's nothing against those communities. It just seems like they're being hijacked too, because of what you're just talking about. It's now open and ripe for those communities to come in and have more say and power, people to come in and experiment with those type of things. And so, of course, there's going to be factions and agendas that hijack that too, that want to control that. Now this brings up a lot of different topics that you mentioned earlier. The one that we hear about big in the States now is identity politics. You talked a little bit about what are we identifying with, right? And so the important thing about this for me is labels. So it might be helpful to say I'm an uncle in certain situations, right? I'm around other people who have niece and nephews. It might be appropriate then to say, I'm an uncle too. I have a niece and a nephew, only one niece and nephew. But now if I go to, I don't know, to the grocery store and say, oh, I'm Uncle Josh, it's not as relevant there, right? I don't have my niece and nephew with me. So, it all depends. So it's like, when is it helpful to pick up these labels and when is it helpful to put them down?
But we could say, why even have the labels? The label is that we can identify ourselves in the group.
Yes.
So that's technically what it is. So this is group dynamics. So when we go into a group, we figure out what is this group about, and then we find the correct label, the correct cap. We take on the correct role, so we will not be ostracized from the group. So these are some of the dynamics that play in as well when we create a narrative around a label or an identification marker, as in I am this, I am that. So thereby I fit into that level of the hierarchy, I fit into that level in the group. And by that I get a position. By that I'm secure, I'm safe, I have somewhere where I can be part of.
This is exactly to this point of belonging, because we all have to have a sense of belonging, right? To be seen and heard. This is really important for everybody. It just seems like this whole thing around gender within the past, even just 10 years, I think, has just accelerated tremendously. Where 30 years ago, it was kind of in the shadows and frowned upon. But now it's like gone the opposite way. Like if you haven't experimented with these type of lifestyles, and there's probably something wrong with you. It's done a complete 180 almost at one point. And I don't think it's either good or bad.
No, but I
these
want to
roles
put something
are important.
in there.
Sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Roles,
Sorry for interrupting you.
No.
Because that ties into, again, when we talk about Jung and Freud, they founded, especially Freud, the whole personality structure on sexuality. He seeded that in. Right. Who you are depends on your sexuality. If you're perverted, if you're neurotic, or whatever you are, it all ties down to your anus and your vagina or your penis and your mouth. And that's sorry being a little bit stern here, but that it ties into that one. So no wonder that then we had the hippie movement and everybody was free and I could do whatever I wanted to do, and all of these kind of things. And we have had different situations in the Victorian times where everything was shut down and onward and so forth. So we have had just in my time the whole that it's so important that our sexual lives work well, that we have good sex with each other, that everything we are almost defined by how good sex you have. If you have bad sex in your relationship, well, what's wrong with you guys or whatever, then it's a problem. You need to go see a therapist. You have these sex therapists that teach you how to have correct sex. You do tantra together or whatever it is, as if that is the foundation of the relationship, as that's the foundation of who we are as humans.
Yeah, and this is where I think that the biggest mutual agreement that we have on this, obviously, is, that's such a small part of who we are, or what we should be even paying attention to. And here we are amplifying the whole kind of thing in a way, but it's just like, is this really an important... People would, the way I look at, when I see this stuff, people would think that is the most important thing in their life, is how they identify gender-wise, and then it's turned into personal pronoun preferences, and then people are afraid that they'll address someone by the wrong pronoun. And I just feel this is going a little bit overboard. Now, I can get if someone's being hostile and disrespectful and things like this, but to lead with this and make this a requirement on forms and things now, to me, it really, I wonder about the transhumanist aspect of this, right? Because transhumanists, the folks who would like to merge man and machine, they really don't have any need for, any kind of sexuality or gender or the more, I think, traits that are skillful is like you could say there's some masculine historically more masculine traits and historically more feminine traits. This also goes into biology too, we were talking a little bit about earlier, but there are certain things once we have our assigned gender, whatever we want to call it, right? The physical, the penises and vaginas, like a male is not going to lactate naturally to be able to raise a child. This ties into more things like care. The way men care are different than the way women care. Or we can say masculine and feminine, right? It doesn't mean they care less, or maybe they do, but it's different traditionally, actually, right? Yeah. I mean, now a man can step in and take on the roles of a mom too, but I feel that maybe the healthiest way is to have this kind of mutual understanding about what each one is going to bring to the I can't really speak because I don't have any kids.
What about we take completely out of the psychodynamics? There are new studies that shows that yes, men can't lactate, but if we have two men that decide to have a child together, and we are talking about males without wombs, so we have biologically two males that are defined genetically as males. Their electrochemical composition is male. And they decide to have a child together because they love each other. So they get a female to produce it for them somehow. That's not the discussion. Point being in this is that typically one of these males that have the larger connection to the child will begin to create oxytocin. And oxytocin is the chemical, that's the neurotransmitter, that's the, I forgot the word here.
Love drug is what they call it.
Yes.
Dumb it down a little bit.
Yes. That creates connection, that creates caretaking, that creates that for instance, we have this stereotype that the female and the mother typically in what we call a gender or a relationship where we have a female with a womb and a vagina and a male with a penis and no womb, that they have a child together, then it's often the female that takes on the role, wakes up during nighttime because she produces naturally more oxytocin that makes her more alert, which is a biological imperative trained within the female programming for decades and centuries and eons and what have you, so that she could protect the offspring, whereas the male has a more tendency to be a little bit more loose and not as much, sleeping deeper and these kind of things. But the new studies show that if we have two males that do the same setup in a family setup and they bring up a child together, one of the males will naturally develop more oxytocin and take the role, the biological role of the caretaker that sleeps easier, that worries a little bit more, that has the softer spot, and the other male will take the little bit more discipline, a little bit stronger, a little bit I'll show you how to conquer the world tendencies, which goes with a different type of chemical, sorry, I forgot the word, hormone, that's the word I was going for, that goes into more the testosterone, the more in the adrenaline, the kick, the survival mode, these kind of things that matches up the limbic system. So we have a father and a mother, no matter what gender we have, no matter what bodies we have some of the same dynamics that goes into survival inside the world. And that's why I want to poke a little bit of hole in when we talk about the anima and the animus as in part of when males go to therapy or when males are around their females or the other one they choose to be partner up with, however the construction is. But if we go in traditional relationships between a woman with a vagina and a womb and a man without a womb but with a penis, then the typical setup is that, yes, he needs to be in better contact with his emotions. He needs to be more feminine. He needs to get in contact with his feminine side. And I would actually say, no, he actually needs to learn to produce oxytocin.
I would agree, because there's already the predominant feminine in that relationship. As far as the gay couple, I'm not to blow it off or disrespect it. I just don't have any experience in that. I don't really have any interest of diving in that. It's what you're saying. It seems like it, but it's. I guess I'm not qualified to comment on that.
In terms of having a child, that's what I mean, right?
Yeah, right. I don't have a gay partner, and nor with a child. I have no,
Yes, but this is the understanding of when we touch ground with the psychodynamics, and we think it's psychological. Science is now telling us actually it's not. It's biological. So it's not psychological, it's biological.
What about breastfeeding the child then, I guess?
You can do it by bottle.
Well, yeah, and then that goes into a whole other thing. And see, I'm not qualified to talk about this because I don't have lactating breasts.
What is it that produces the oxytocin? It's actually skin contact. It's about this sleeping together, which animals do as well. Yeah. It's about the nurturing, it's the caretaking. It's about touching the child or your partner. It's about the touching. And it's not about sexuality. It's nothing to do with sexuality. But oxytocin is created during the sexual act, mostly in females, interestingly enough. That's why females are more affected by the sexual act than males are. So what gives the oxytocin in males, that is that they learn to be more sensual, that they learn to be more intimate, that they allow themselves to be more intimate. And is that connected to the feminine side? I don't think so, because I can see many caring males that have it naturally.
Sure. And I get that part. What I'm wondering about is the lactating, you know. So you can buy bottle, but then there's these studies that say, well, with breastfeeding, you know, the child is more connected and it seems more natural. And if for whatever reason, I think there was formula shortages in the States for one time. So I don't want to get off in the weeds on that. But what I want to do is pick up on the...
I would say, though, because I think it's important to put it in here, the connection to the child is not tied to lactating. It is tied to the nurturing. It's tied to the sociological contact, the eye contact, the voice contact, the hand contact, how the child feels when you cuddle the child, how much you are around and in contact, talking, looking into the eyes of the child. And you can do all of that while you are bottle feeding. You don't have to be breastfeeding, because that's also a myth that you have to breastfeed. What is in the breast milk is that there are some chemicals that are helping to boost the immune system of the child. But many of these formulas today are getting better and better, especially if you live in countries that are interested in continuing their human population, and you know the subcurrent of that one. And we also know that even within breast milk of mothers, we're seeing more and more pollution, microplast units. We have a lot of stuff that goes into the breast milk as well. So it's not about that this is the only way to go around. This is also, for me, an institution that is tied to make women breastfeed and to, in my opinion, making them slightly more animalistic, because they are flashing their boobs all over the place, and it's okay. It should be so. I live in Denmark. It's completely okay in Denmark. I know it's not other places, but it is primitive, especially from a person like me that is not in the breeder program. I look at it from the outside and I look and say, that's enormously beautiful, but I didn't feel like that when I was pregnant. I felt like I was part of alien with Sigourney Weaver. I felt like I had some weird stuff inside my stomach that shouldn't be there.
And this goes into a whole other dynamic with your work, you know, about how this is actually in a way parasitical, right? I mean, the child, you know, it has to substitute off the female, right?
It's
in the
brewed.
womb,
It's literally brewed out of my body. Right. So I had to make that mental flip whenever I began thinking like that, because I knew that would affect my chemical level, that would affect the child, and I couldn't have my child being grown out of that feeling that she was an alien, right? So I had to modify my thought form that were then connected to the bio-DNA, because the child literally grows out of the mother, completely out of her cells, out of her tissue, out of everything the mother produces. When I go outside and go into my extra systemic mindset, I'm just looking at that thinking, I cannot find anything that compares to that with anywhere where I've been. So this must be unique for this system, and that's a weird thing.
It's so bizarre, this womb birth, you know. And on the other hand, I totally see that. On the other hand, I see the trouble of, oh, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. You know, childbirth is such a beautiful thing. I see that as totally imbalanced way to look at it 100% too. You know, maybe it is for some people, but overall though, and then how would they address, you know, the fact that it is subsistinating, you know, on another life, and it's completely dependent for the longest time on the mother, completely helpless. And but what ties into the bigger picture of okay, well, let's say, you know, without those options, then the human race would die out, though, right? So, what we're calling human, this form that we have now, without that type of birth, unless you get into totally artificial means, and then that goes into this gray, transhumanist agenda too, where they just want to control everything technologically, and you have to get approved to be a parent, you know, and go through. Which I think it would be better if some people did parenting courses too, but you know, to have to go through a government organization to have birth, it seems a little extreme for me now. Also, we talk about the racial grids, though, too. In this, if there's, you talked a little bit earlier about this type of belonging in certain racial groups, but how does this go into like the racial grids and lineages, and too? Because if all the different lineages and different racial groups died out, well, then it would be like a hive mind, right? Everybody would have kind of the same skin color. Wouldn't there be more of an opportunity for everybody to just be like this blob gray hive mind if there's no kind of culture is part of it, but also just like skin color? Not that means anything on its own. Let's just say that all would die out and everybody had like eons down the road. Everything would be so interbred. I don't know if that would be possible or not. That everybody would basically have the same skin color, the same culture. Would that ever be possible? Because if there were no races or lineages like that, it seems like that would happen. But maybe you're saying that would never be possible.
Well, again, depends on the past, present, and future, right? Skin color, let's start with that one. The reason why we have different types of higher and lower levels of melanin, I was going to say melatonin, but that's the one you sleep. Yeah, melanin, the one that you have that colors your skin, depends on your exposure of the sun. So the more sun you are, if you live in a jurisdiction or an area on the planet that has more sun, your body will naturally protect yourself by creating more melanin that creates the darker skin tone. So you can
over generations too, right?
Yeah, so
it's not like me just traveling
to Africa.
And I just
so that has, according to theory, has happened over generations, of course. Yeah. But when we talk about the extrasystemic or the extraterrestrials that are living in other planetary systems similar to ours, because they are similar to ours, not as the enclosure prohibiting enslavement technology system we have, but in different variations of what we call the human or humanoid species, they have also got different skin color. But their skin tone is defined by their star, because our sun is a star. So it depends on what type of star you're living under. Are you living under a blue star, or are you living under a green star, or white star, or cold star, or hot star? A hot star is one that has kinetic processes, like ours is a typical fourth dimensional. But if you go to the fifth dimension, it's a cold star. And there you begin to have skin color gray or blue, or if the sun completely turns into what we call a dark sun, then you get black skin, completely black skin, as the Orions have. But they also have white skin because they have different variations within that system. So it depends on the star you live under. So that's the skin color. So if we all live, if the universal structure becomes the same and is one star system, and that's the only thing that we have got left, well then yes, we will all have the same skin color. But and in the future of our solar system, when our sun has died out, then we will become very palish and very similar to the Greys, because they come from systems where their star has died out. So thereby they no longer produce what we call a color of their skin, which is a signature defining the genetic composition and the dimension that these races come from.
It's fascinating. Probably like to go more into that maybe later, but I wanted to pick up on a few other things here too. This I think it's called the gender principle, or the law of gender. How things in reality, some people say this, I haven't really explored this, but things have either a masculine and a feminine. They're saying things that are, if I'm getting this right, do you know what I'm talking about? Like things that are manifest in this reality, they have a gender principle, either kind of a feminine or a masculine side, or both, this type of thing. I'm trying to give examples. Life forms are pretty obvious, right? Even the ones that are have both sexes or change sexes, right? I guess like on magnetism too, there's a positive and a negative thing. Now I don't know if that would be more polarity or not. As far as replication dynamics too, right? Yeah. Do you know what help me out here? And how this ties into either distortions around gender, or what is considered kind of a healthy thing, maybe what's an outdated thing, what's the ideal version?
Several things come to mind. First thing that comes to mind is that if we do, not that I am in any way a form religious, but those of you who listen to me quite a lot of times, I got a bachelor's degree in theology, and we have in the first creational myth, we have the Elohim, that are the supreme powers that generates the female and the male in their image. Then you have the second creational myth where you have Yahweh Adam, that creates Adam, Adama, and that's the Yahweh Elohim, that is the lesser God that is within the realms of what we could call creation. So the supreme powers are beyond creation, and the Yahweh Elohim is within creation. And that male creates what we understand as an Adam and Eve, or Adama, taken from the soil and blown ruach or spirit into his nostrils, from where he comes to life. And from that golem in beautiful life comes, that's a clay, a mud body, comes off the soil, pulls from the side, not necessarily the rib, it's just pulled from the side. Or half of it is cut in two, you could put that as well, is the female version created. So in that way, as is played upon in the unification idea of marriage, is that the half man and the half woman will become one again when they reunite in marriage, before God and before Yahweh Elohim, and then fulfill the creation that he began and split into two parts, which we also know the Kalontic sciences have talked a bit about these divisions.
Schemos, right?
Yes.
Heroes, spiritual
so
marriage.
that's kind of the unification of the male and female, in where the male and female in ourselves, kind of, when we look at it, is the left side that is female or the left side that is masculine, or whatever, what have we. I can say my personal experience is that my left side was cyborg. And I've seen many who actually has that experience, that their left side is transhuman. And the right side is actually the original progressive human side. So but all depending on where we come from. So it's not necessarily male and female. Actually, I say my left side is also the past, whereas my right side is the future. So I don't see my body as gender-based in that manner. It's biologically a female with a womb, but it's not energy. In my energy system, has nothing to do with gender. But I can say that when I look into, for instance, if I get a new computer, which happens rarely, but when I do, I know it's a male or a female. If I go into a car, not because it has been driven by someone, it has a personality.
This is the type of thing I'm talking about.
Yes,
yeah.
It does. It's kind of, this is a female. Yes, or a bicycle I bought years ago to my daughter, and it was from the day one, from the get-go, it was just breaking down. It was no use. I called it a karma bike because it was not working well. And then I bought her a bicycle that was kind of a male, a little bit more puffed up, a little bit more mountain bike-ish, and that's still going strong, because it had a completely different energetic signature to it. Before I began putting in my energy, it was kind of already engineered that way. So yes, there are what we call consciousness structures that in our mind resembles masculine and feminine. There are energy units that in our mind resembles masculine and feminine. And third cycle energy units are what we typically identify as humanoid or masculine. Fourth cycle energy units are typically what we identify as caretaking or feminine.
And there's even, right, what you're saying is in higher realms, there's still distinction between masculine and feminine, but there's no physical gender. There's no penises and vaginuses.
It's about the cycles. It's all about, because what is masculine in terms of the cycle? It is the conquering of space. It is spatial energies. Learn to master spatial energies. Learn to master what we call cubes and forms and geometry and all the things we also see. Mechanics and how things work in space. Yep. So that's you and your reality field, you're learning that one. Whereas in the fourth cycle, we learn between the interpersonal interaction between other living life forms, and there learn to connect via the heart field. So that's a different type of consciousness structure. So that's kind of the fourth cycle and the third cycle. And when we talk about the fifth cycle races, they will develop a new type of chromosome that I call the chromosome, the pentachromosome, instead of the X and the Y. The Y is the third cycle, the X is the fourth cycle. So the next one will be a pentagram or a pentachromosome, where these two things are united. So it's not about the male and female, it's about uniting the understanding, working with technology and space and conquering space, and not necessarily invading space, that's the distortion of it, but alongside with activation of the heart field and learning to work with other living beings that exist in these spaces, and how do we learn to work as a team. So fifth cycle is all about teamwork.
And so the chromosome looks kind of like our body does, with 5 points, right? A head, 2 arms, and a leg. And this goes into also past lives too, because who knows? Like, I can't say I've within any certainty that I've recalled many past lives, but it seems from the reports I hear, gender isn't stuck the same all the way through either. No. So that's another point to make, I guess. Now, there's also gender wars, but I won't go into that. This kind of came around the feminist side, and there's still, men and women are still having challenges every day, right? I mean, that kind of goes without saying, too.
I would actually say that it's kind of a replication or a mirror or a remnant or a shadow of the original galactic wars between the humanoid races and the humans, the true humans, which began at the fourth cycle with the heart field, and the progressive humans, whereas the third cycle with the humanoids just conquering space and technology. And we're still in the middle of that war, and that's replicated into the quote-unquote male and females of our system, so that males and females are at war with each other because females are so emotional and males are so logical, and it's all about males are conquering space, penetrating everything and showing their strengths, where females, oh, I'm so sensitive, and I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit
no, these cliches are very enlightening, actually, because they came from somewhere, right? More than likely.
So for me, just to tie that one up, then that means that not that females are saying, well, then I need to be a full cycle human and I got the prerogatives and I am a full cycle human, whereas males, you're not, because males have only got one version of their chromosome, is they got the XY, right? So they are third cycle, fourth cycle, still learning to crawl into the fourth cycle, whereas females, oh yeah, we're so good, we are XX, so we are further ahead than the rest of you.
And it's interesting too, because I heard from a friend of mine who's mRNA was he studied, and I didn't study this, so I have to look at it. But the XY chromosome. If I'm getting this right, he said it's only the Y that's activated or something. Or no, wait, what was it? So there's the XX, and so. Yeah, okay, so both genders, according to science, have X activated, but the feminine doesn't have the other X activated, but the male has both the X and the Y activated. So I thought that was really interesting to hear that. So they would say the exact opposite, I guess, of what you're saying. I mean,
because what I'm actually saying is, because that's where the females need to be very, very observant, is that they have the artificial fourth cycle activated, but they haven't got the original fourth cycle activated. So we are also behind. We need to activate the original fourth cycle, whereas males have got the original third cycle activated, but they have got the artificial fourth cycle. So
it's a big cluster all around, right? Cluster F.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done to get into the fifth cycle. So point being with this, why I wanted to talk about the male and the female and the female and the male, is that we need to look at the chromosomes, we need to look at the cycles, and we need to learn to look into consciousness potentials and understand what is it that we need to develop to activate our original consciousness units.
And that's what we're going to get into next, kind of the solutions and what should we do for both genders. I know in my experience, and probably can stress this to males in general, is the heart field, right? Working on the heart field. I know for me, it was starting to wake up, I did not even see how far off I was, how disconnected I was from my heart. It was basically like a defense mechanism of either denial or, I'm in the right, nobody can tell me that I'm wrong. Or if I was wrong, I didn't care. I could just act out, and I was entitled to do so because everything was so shitty. Why can't I be shitty, or kind of get mine? This is how far off and distorted I was at one point, and what really was a big opener for me is sitting there and just weeping, and then just the physical ache in the heart that happened when I first started doing inner work. I mean, it just physically ached and ached. These memories came up of how I was treating myself, how I was treating other people, and I couldn't see it at the time. It wasn't until I kind of hit rock bottom and I had to look inside And then I started seeing all this stuff, having these regrets to begin with, trying to make amends, forgiving myself, asking for forgiveness from others, having others, forgiving others too. And that couldn't be forced. That was the right time to do it. It just happened, because I couldn't have done it before then, and not everything deserves forgiveness either. Or sometimes we might not be able to forgive anybody or certain things the entire life. The main thing is with forgiveness too, I found for me, it's a unnecessary burden I'm carrying around. But that has to be leveled with the actions that were done were not right. And they need to be things put in place to prevent those from ever happening again. That's why I'm not about forgiving and forgetting. Forgiving, yes. Remembering, though, so we know how that cannot happen again. Yeah. Because that just ends up more harm upon harm upon harm. So when starting working on developing the heart field, basically clearing out the shit that was there, excuse my French here, but it's almost like once that stuff gets cleared out, then our more natural self or being or qualities can shine through. It's just like this soot or this clog that's there, these distortions that are on top that cover the natural way we can be, right? I mean, I don't know. So I would stress this is a huge thing for males in general, to work on that. And, like, what are the benefits of that? Well, there's a lot more connection in our everyday life, too. But I would throw it back to Randy here to leave her with her advice and think what she wants to say about this.
I'm definitely there are more levels to work on here. First and foremost, the whole thing about forgiveness, because that in itself that's a huge topic, which is important when we do self-work and inner work. And my take on it is that for me, forgiveness is mostly forgiving ourselves. As the most important thing, but not to write away our responsibility, not that we can't stand responsible for our actions. And as Josh also said, and as you said, it's all about when we discover that our actions has not been in alignment with how we actually want to be. So we kind of need to figure out, how do I want to be? So we have something to compare with. Yes. And once we kind of see, whether we look at role models or we are looking deep inside of ourselves, first we begin with role models, later on we begin to remember who and what we actually are. And then that's the level we compare with. That's the opposition, where we begin to play ping pong with everything I have become and something I don't want to be. That's called the persona in Jungian psychotherapy as well, where you kind of say, I identify myself with a false version that I have made so it matches others and their dynamics and whatever's going on. So in a way, we're completely fake. So the idea of being authentic is to, okay, who am I? That's the first part of that process, the acceptance of, I have become something I cannot align myself with. I become something that I do not see as who I actually am. And then the investigation is, then who am I? And that's where we begin to work with our chipped off parts of the shadow, or whatever we want to call it. All of these different aspects of self we have cut away, that we have stored away, that are immature, that are not developed, that has not been looked at, that were chipped away in different levels of our personality structure in the different stages and ages we have had, so we could match everybody else, what they wanted from us. So the first step is to say, what do I want from myself? Who do I want to be? Who, if I look at the best version of a human I can be, how do I want to be? And then we begin to put that down, envision that, and then we see, shoot, I'm so far from that. And then the work really begins to say, okay, then how do I get there? What do I need to do to get there? Not by punishing ourselves, not by being harsh on ourselves, but actually through kindness and nurturing. And the first step in this work is to learn to love yourself. And we heard that so many times, so new agey, right? But it goes with producing oxytocin. Yeah. Begin producing oxytocin so your body can relax, so you can get back into your body. You can get back into, I am okay.
And not only that, the consciousness potentials can't even be there, because that's blocking. Until that's there, it's really hard to do that. Or you or whoever gets so cold, right? I like to look at it as identifying core values too. So then I can, if I'm in alignment with those core values, every single moment of my life when I'm working towards those or living from those, then there can be more satisfaction too, instead of necessarily goal after goal after goal. I mean, we still have to have goals too, but yeah, basically the same thing is, who do I want to be? What do I really find important? What makes life worth living? What qualities? And then be in alignment. I can be in alignment with those qualities, right? And be that as a purpose.
Yeah.
One of the ways.
Yes. Instead of identifying with or without penis, with or without womb, with or without sexuality, because they're also asexual people.
Yeah.
All the time that most of my life, long periods where I've not been in a relationship or anything, I haven't had any sexuality at all. It just completely goes dormant because it's not really a natural part of my body, but it can be ignited like everything else because it's energy. And if we're responsive to energy, then we will respond to whatever energy that's in our vicinity. And there we also need to say, okay, who am I compared to that energy? Do I want to participate in that energy or do I not? So it's mastery of energy also. So my, not solution, but my advice, or what I would recommend or what I would like to happen out there, is that the whole labeling within the base program of who and what we are, for me, would be much more fruitous if people would say, what kind of human do I want to be? No matter what biological sex I have, no matter what my psychological sexual structure is, no matter what my tendencies are, no matter what I'm attracted to, what kind of human do I want to be when I'm in a relationship with my gay partner, when I'm in a relationship with my lesbian partner, or my hetero partner, or my transgender partner, or whatever we are? Yeah. Who do we want to be when we're together?
Instead of leading with whatever sexual preferences we have or gender viewpoints we have, what kind of human do I want to be? And even in relationships with things that aren't a being, like, how am I in relationship with how I feel, my emotions, my thoughts, my memories, my plans? How do I want to be in relationship to everything else in my life that doesn't even involve beings?
Including our machines and our plants and our cars and our bicycles. Absolutely. And what have
Crystals.
We're talking about so yes, but there are so many more takes on this one. This is just an opening where my point is that yes, we are on a spectrum, but for me the end goal of all of these processes of left and right and in between and exploration and explosion and new things and who are we and what are we, is to go into what kind of human do I want to be. Because what's the greatest what we call armor or panzer or protection mechanism we have towards transhumanism? That is, what type of human do I want to be? How do I want to be around other living beings? How do I want to treat myself and others? And what do I want this world to turn into? How do I want it to be a machine world as they did in the third cycles? That was what the war was about then. We have been there, done that already. Let's work with the interconnectedness, the relationships we have, how we are around each other, but not just as selfish, purpose-driven, I'm in this because I need you to make me feel good. That's a whole other podcast as well. But go in and say, this is, I'm in this relationship because from this I can develop and progress. From this my partner can develop and progress. And how do we work as a team to develop and progress each other as a progression couple?
Yes.
No matter what our gender is, no matter what our biologically has determined for us, because I remember being males in previous lifetimes, and I remember how it felt to have a dick, that thing between your legs. I'm quite happy I don't have that. Well, now it just instead of have breast in a way, right? But so the whole biology for me is a weird thing to be in. But the experiences of mastering this body, no matter what gender it has, that should be in the forefront. How do I actually learn to master this body? How do I learn to transform the energies, no matter what gender it has, to its highest potential, to its highest progression rate of what it actually can become? And how do I liberate this body from the enslavement and the programs that are running our reality, no matter what gender I have?
The key word here, human. Yes, and when we start to work on the body and mastering the body, it doesn't have to start with our bits and pieces, our private bits and pieces, right? That's That's
No,
only
it starts
one
with the heart.
That's
It
a really
starts with the
small
heart.
part of the physical body.
Yes,
yeah.
it starts with the heart. It always starts with the heart, and then it goes into the mind, and then it goes into the body. Actually, the body is the first level that we learn to nurture and take good care of, so we have a vessel to exist
Yes.
within. So we make that work well in our surroundings, and then we go to the heart. But the heart and the body are actually interconnected. And then the mind is the last thing. So people who are doing this thinking the mind is the first thing to explore is actually, from my perspective, from a fourth cycle perspective, yeah, you did that in the third cycle. Get into your heart,
Yes.
get into the interconnectedness, and understand that we are part of a reality and we're not islands. We are interconnected.
And care comes to mind here too, which might be different on different stages of where we are, who we are too. But how can this care be applied to self, to others, to everyone, to the reality field, where it needs to be? What are the distortions in care? What is the true, authentic care? What does that mean to me and each other? Yeah.
Which means I would love to do a sequel on this one because we're kind of hitting the
Yes.
the minutes.
So thank you all for listening, and take good care of each other and yourself, and into the heart and all kinds of optimal humanness.